Chapter 24. "He's in shock," said the spook woman when Sean hadn't spoken for a few seconds. The fact was, he couldn't speak. His mouth was desert dry. "Take as much time as you need, Private." She looked up at Franklin. "There's no need for you or the sergeant to remain." It was a clear dismissal. Adams didn't budge, merely glanced at the lieutenant. Franklin's crossed arms might have crossed a little more tightly. "That's kind of you, but we'll stay." Her mouth tightened. "It wasn't a request." "Then I have nothing to decline." "I could make it an order." "You could, and if it came to me via a superior officer, who you could actually persuade to order me to abandon one of my men, I would have no choice but to obey." Go on, just piss off, Sean thought bitterly. He didn't want any more witnesses to his humiliation than strictly necessary, least of all Adams. Because he was screwed, and he knew it. If he had thought a few months in prison were bad, what would he get now? And it was his fault. Totally, utterly his own stupid fault. He could have walked when he found out the truth, but no, he'd stayed. "You stupid, stupid idiot, Harker. You've done this to yourself." The woman dismissed the point with a slight nod, turned her attention back to Sean, one eyebrow raised a little as she waited for him to speak. I don't know anything," he said. He could hear how pathetic the bluster sounded, but then he remembered the one thing he had left. "Yeah," he thought fiercely, "pride. I'm not just a crook. I was doing this to protect people. Where were you when Clocky got slotted?" The man-spook folded his fingers together and regarded Sean over the top of them. "If we wanted to arrest you, Private, we wouldn't be bothering with this talk. As I said, your prints were on the outside of the package. That means you had nothing to do with wrapping the goods. The fingerprints inside belonged to one Joshua Heaton, now a corporal in your unit, sent down when he was a teenager, 5 years ago, for breaking and entering, also with a record of aggravated assault and inciting racial hatred." Sean fought to keep his face impassive as a chill spread down his spine. Heaton had only admitted to one of those 3 crimes. "When we met, you were driving a Daewoo Matiz with fake plates. But the colour and model match a car previously registered to one Mrs. Daphne Heaton of Leighton, Corporal Heaton's mother. Do you see how things are falling into place?" Sean forced his breathing to steady. "Why aren't you asking Corporal Heaton all this?" he said. The man's gaze was unblinking. "Because we're asking you." Still, Sean kept quiet. He hadn't lied when he told Heaton he'd never grasped, and he wasn't going to start now. "You're a loyal friend, Private Harker. Do you think Corporal Heaton will repay this loyalty? That he'll go down without dragging you with him?" "Of course he's been a good friend to you, hasn't he?" the woman said softly. "He's shown you the time of your life. He's given you tasters, just tasters of a life you could never afford on your salary. Cool gear, fast car, nice digs. Did you enjoy your night with the girl?" Shit. How long had these people been watching him? She had exactly described what happened. Had they even had a camera in Heaton's spare room? "You already know so much," he said bitterly. "You don't need me to tell you anything." "We didn't know." Sean frowned despite himself. "Then how?" "The word is grooming, Private. It's not just something paedophiles do on social media, and yours is a textbook case." Sean snorted. "That's bollocks. Okay, yeah, I stayed over at Corporal Heaton's, and there was a girl. She was his girlfriend's mate, and I was invited along for company." "His girlfriend's mate," the man repeated with a faint smile. "So the corporal has a girlfriend, talks about her all the time, I bet. Sees her every weekend. Never off the phone to her. Tell me, is there a single picture of her anywhere in his flat? Anywhere at all? It never occurred to Sean to check. But now the man mentioned it, no, he couldn't remember a photo anywhere. We have access to his phone records, you know. I can confirm that the only woman he has dialed on a private number in the last month was his mother. However, a week before you and I first met, he dialed an escort agency in Andover that specializes in, well, escorts with added duties. We've checked their rates, and the amount that appears on his credit card after that call matches what would be needed for a double hiring. Sean didn't blink, but it was hitting him like a very slow thump in the guts, one that just kept on coming. Oh my God. Groomed. The bastard. Heaton had even asked which one was Deb's. Sean had assumed it was a joke. Sean would kill him. Sean would walk out of this room right now and actually kill him. He felt sick. And he knew his mask had slipped. The hate that churned inside him right now was impossible to put a blank face on, and they had clocked it. He had as good as confessed without saying a word. He had to force his dry mouth to say the words. I think I need a lawyer. The woman spook winced, as if he had farted in polite company. I really don't think you do. A lawyer will force us to do this by the book, which will inevitably end in your conviction and imprisonment in a place where you'll have quite a reputation as the man who helped supply terrorists with weapons. Sean shot her a sharp glance when she said terrorists, but he kept quiet and she kept going. Not one I'd like myself, but there you go. It will be something to keep you warm and happy for the next 30 years. Whereas, the man contributed, doing without the lawyer and cooperating with us, using the skills and training you already have as a soldier, will possibly mean no prison at all. Sean dragged his eyes away from him for a moment, stared at the wall, the ceiling, out of the window. He couldn't run. So it was either get a lawyer or work against Heaton. Of course, he didn't actually have the money for a lawyer, but would that matter? He glared at them from under his brows, but it was merely a mask to disguise the feeling of all hope draining away. Whatever happened, he wasn't going to leave this room a free man. Face it, they knew about the rifles. They weren't going to let that go. He switched his gaze to the floor. It wasn't to supply terrorists, he muttered. That was the one shred of comfort he could hold on to. And maybe a good brief in court could get him less than 30 years if he stuck to it. And of all the lies Corporal Heaton has told you, that's the one true thing, is it? Sean stared at him. Yes, of course it's true. He's a serving soldier, for fuck's sake. What would he be doing with terrorists? Just tell us where the rifles are, Private. Final shreds of Sean's pride crept away to die. He said the client had collected them, he muttered, still looking at the floor. He was now officially grassing, and he couldn't find a single toss to give. I can tell you where they were, if that helps. Go on. And so Sean described how the op had gone down. The observation, switching rifles with dummies, hiding them under the bush. The spooks remained expressionless while he spilled. Sean didn't dare turn his head to meet the glare coming from Adams. He could feel it frying the side of his face. Quite the criminal mastermind is Corporal Heaton, the man murmured when he had finished. So, you're just going to pull him in? Sean asked, hopefully. But the spook just looked at his watch. Any more and we'll be overrunning. The woman looked at her own watch and concurred, then back at Sean. The sole reason for this entire charade, Private Harker, All the interview in the platoon claptrap was to let us spend time with you alone. There was no other way. We could do that on base without being observed. And if we spend any more time now, the others will start to wonder why your interview has taken so long. So here is what you will do, and remember, you are still cooperating. This evening you will find a reason to go into town. You will tell your friends you are calling a taxi. You will leave the base at precisely 1900 hours. The gatehouse was still festooned with warning tape. Somewhere between the end of demolition and the start of rebuilding, it had double the number of armed guards and a hand-operated traffic barrier. Sean stepped through the pedestrian barrier and out of the camp. Dead on 1900. Arsing hell. Be on time. Don't make me have to talk to people. The excuse had been easy. His mum's birthday was coming up. Shit, he was always forgetting. He'd done his bit. Now they just had to do theirs. At 1910 seconds, a hybrid Prius swished up, with the name of a taxi firm displayed by a light on the roof. The driver wore a flat cap and a casual pea jacket. "Ride for a name of Harker?" he called. Not to Sean, but to the guards, in an accent that was pure Wiltshire. The guards merely indicated where Sean waited, in civvies, hunched up and trying to be invisible to anyone who might want a friendly chat, like any muckers who suddenly thought it was a good idea to share a ride into town. Sean trotted over to the taxi and climbed in the back. The driver eased the car away from the curb to head into town. Sean hadn't been in an electric car before, and even now he took time to think that it sucked. At slow speeds, the Prius ran off its battery and barely made a sound. "Hello, Private." The voice was now accentless, as posh as it had been before. The man didn't turn round, but their eyes met briefly in the rearview mirror before he looked back at the road to concentrate on steering. "Where are we going?" Sean asked. The driver signalled to turn onto the main road. The engine cut in as the car picked up speed. "To carry on where we left off," he said. The last instruction the spooks had given Franklin was to issue Sean with duties that kept him well away from Heaton for the rest of the day, which unfortunately meant that Sean had to work under Adams's gaze instead. To everyone else, Adams was his usual self, an affable tower of integrity and discipline. But Sean was aware that whenever the sergeant's eyes rested on him, they were dark and blank, and he was definitely excluded from the banter. The feeling of isolation continued in the taxi. Apart from the opening words when he'd got in, the spook said nothing. They headed along back roads into Andover, where they pulled up in a small car park beneath some trees, next to a much more respectable Audi saloon. The other driver's window whirred down as they drew up. The woman spook behind the wheel gave Sean a cool nod. The man spook twisted round in his seat so that he could see both of them, and pressed buttons to make sure the taxi's passenger side windows slide down. Now the three of them could have a conversation. "First," the woman said, as though the intervening hours hadn't happened and they were just continuing where they had left off, "let us tell you why we're not immediately picking up Corporal Heaton. If all we wanted was to clamp down on his operation, we could do it in 5 minutes. But Heaton has the same flaw as most criminal masterminds, which is that he actually isn't one. He'll sell to anyone. He sold to us. And that is how we found you. But there is an even bigger fish who we suspect is Heaton's main customer. This individual, plus the equipment provided by Heaton, could lead to big, big trouble. That's who we're looking to stop. And if we shut Heaton down, our man will just go somewhere else for the goods." The man opened up the glove compartment and slid a photo out of a folder, which he passed to Sean. Sean glanced down, and there was Rich. The shot must have been captured by a hidden camera. He was looking off to one side, with no idea he was being snapped, and there was a blurred crowd all around him. They looked at him expectantly. "Yeah, calls himself Rich," Sean said. "Who is he?" "His name is unimportant," the woman told him. "And if you knew it, there's a danger you would inadvertently use it in his or Heaton's hearing. Rich will do. And just in case you continue to harbour delusions that he is some harmless eccentric with a few right-wing views, We have every reason to believe he is involved in a group that has been carrying out a number of terrorist strikes over the last few years that are made to look like IS. Sean frowned, thinking back to his first impression of Rich. A wealthy tosser with wealthy friends, but surely all talk, no action, or so he'd thought. Just one more way he'd been taken in by their sick act. How do you do that? Oh, it's surprisingly easy. First, you need your genuine event, say, a car bomb, an honour killing. Doesn't even need to happen, just to be discovered. Next, for every genuine IS supporter, there are 10 kids whose commitment to jihad extends as far as tweeting "Death to the West" and then getting on with their GCSE revision. They're very easy to frame. Documents are planted, fake computer trails are laid right up to their doorstep, links are forged with genuine IS individuals who are safely out of the country and beyond our reach, and who aren't going to deny it because the publicity is too precious. Presto. A previously undiscovered terrorist cell. Imagine what that does for public confidence. But if you know this, Sean began, most of the time we can catch it, the woman agreed. But it only takes 1 or 2 to slip through. And even if we manage to spot the faked evidence, the fact is, these genuine events are happening and the public is taking notice. The cumulative effect is the same. A climate of fear is created. At first, the man said, Rich faked evidence for events that were nothing to do with him. A house fire that killed the head teacher of a school run jointly by the local church and the local mosque. The brakes failing on a minibus carrying protesters to an anti-war parade. These were genuine accidents that had nothing to do with IS. But he successfully planted the idea in the minds of the media that there was more to them. At first, Sean repeated nervously. So the guy was a shit, but he hadn't hurt anyone. But if that was at first... Then he went further and started causing the incidents himself. So far, we believe we can link Rich to a car bomb planted and discovered in a vehicle belonging to a prominent human rights lawyer exiled from Syria. A gun attack on a man and a woman who had committed the crime of living together without being married. One lived, the other did not. A note pinned to the body said that they had been breaking holy law. Sean felt himself begin to shudder as the list went on. He thought the guy was just a harmless tosser. But he was an actual psycho. Incendiary devices placed in a couple of restaurants, one of which caused deaths. A suicide bombing aimed at a school. Thankfully the bomb went off too soon. Do you see the pattern? Sean clenched his fist to stop the shaking. He's getting worse, he said heavily. Much worse. Of course, this is all a lot for one man to handle, which is why he delegates jobs to his subordinates. Like the attack on the camp that killed Private Clark. Sean sat up sharply. That's bollocks. Those were soldiers who died. He's a wanker, but he's pro-Brit. Why do you want to hit our own soldiers? Why do you want to hit Clarky? She, the woman held up one finger, was black. A second finger. That's 2 reasons someone like Rich would say she had no place in the British Army. But as we say, he delegates. Can you think of anyone else who had a problem with Clark's gender and race? Sean could. For a moment, as the one inevitable name came to mind, it seemed like the whole world stopped and ice ran through his veins. Then, no. He began to shake his head, pushing himself back in his seat as though they were offering him Clark's dead, charred head to hold. No fucking way. Heaton. No. I told you we had access to his phone records, the man said quietly, not blinking, not taking his eyes off Sean's. He was on the phone seconds before the attack. He dialed the number for a cheap pay-as-you-go handset. The connection was made and immediately went dead, simultaneously with the explosion. As I'm sure you're aware, bombs can be detonated by phone. You just use a handset as the power source for the detonator. And as I'm sure you're also aware, Corporal Heaton is very proficient with electronics." "No," Sean gasped. If he had been shocked when they told him how he had been set up with Rachel, now he just wanted to hurl. "So you see, Private," said the woman, "terrorists aren't all Middle Easterners cutting off heads and radicalizing our teenagers. They come in all shapes and sizes." Back to Rich. Perhaps he spun you a story about using those rifles for defense. Perhaps in his own head, it is defense of the way of life he thinks we should all have. However, they will end up being used on innocent civilians whose only crime is to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Where?" Sean demanded in desperation. "When? What's he going to do with—" "We don't know that yet. Chop off the head and the body dies. Stop Rich and you stop those weapons being used," she told him. "So why is he still walking around?" Sean shouted. "Nick him already!" "If our positions were reversed, I'm sure that's what he would do," she agreed. "Laws, who needs them? But the rule of law is there for everyone, and it protects people like him just as much as it protects you and me. That's how we remain better than IS. But there is a downside, which is that we need evidence to make a successful prosecution. And evidence that will stand up in court is very hard to come by," the man added. "He's too clever to leave much of it around." Sean bit on a harsh laugh. "Hey, come on. You can get a warrant to read all Heaton's phone calls and credit cards, but you can't get one for his." The identical looks they gave him were so neutral that they were like an admission. He stared at them. "Shit, you mean you can't? That's how powerful he is?" "But if we had a man inside, then we'd be in business." Sean frowned as he noted their expressions, then realized what they meant, and recoiled. "What, like a double agent, working undercover?" "This is army business, not James Bond," said the man. "It won't be gadgets and sexy women and sports cars, it will be risk." "Are you fucking mental? If I got found out, I'd be dead." "So you're in?" Sean looked away. "Don't have much choice, do I?" Though, he thought bitterly, he did. He could always just go to jail until he qualified for his old age pension. And then he remembered. He had never really forgotten. Holding Clarkie's mutilated, barely alive body in his arms. Anger, sheer violent homicidal rage flooded through his veins. No, he had no choice. Because passing up on this chance to get back at the fuckers who had done that to his mate wasn't an option. "This isn't what I had trained for," he said. "You'll have to tell me what to do." "Be yourself, Private," the woman told him. "You've a criminal history. You've been inside. So you have at least some understanding of the people you will meet. And you're a trained soldier. You're smart. You're streetwise. You know how to read a situation. You can handle yourself with and without a weapon. You're physically fit. In many ways, you're perfect already." She laughed, then added, "And that's not flattery. It's just simple fact." "Now," the man said, "show me your phone." Sean frowned, but shrugged and pulled his phone out. The man studied it, then pulled a briefcase from under his seat and fingered through a selection of different models until he had one that looked similar. He popped the casing and inserted a SIM card, and then handed it back. "It's pay as you go," he said. "And it has only one number programmed in, which goes through to Sergeant Adams. From now on, he is your contact. He's been briefed." "The sergeant," Sean exclaimed. "Do you have a problem with that?" He had no more problem with that than he did with the entire mess he had managed to make of his entire life. In fact, it's pretty trivial in the big scheme of things. "I just don't see Sergeant Adams as a spook." He couldn't see Adams as anything less than 100% straight up. He couldn't see the man who had believed in him enough to get him into the army wanting to have anything more to do with him. "So what do I do then?" he asked. "Exactly what you have been doing," said the driver. "Work with Heaton and whoever he is involved with. Work with Heaton? Sean repeated in disbelief. Work with fucking Heaton after what you've told me? I'll kill him, Manage your anger or go to jail, the man snapped. It was like a slap. Just enough to bring Sean back to his senses. Find out everything you can, without drawing attention to yourself, and report everything back to Sergeant Adams. And you two? There is no us two, the man said simply. He checked the clock on the dashboard. Now, what did you tell your muckers you were off to do? Said I was going to get a present for my mum. Then that's what we'll do. He closed the windows and switched on the engine, reversing out of the space. In the supermarket, the only thing Sean was really aware of was the new phone in his pocket. That was all he was getting as preparation for going undercover. Didn't seem much. What if things went wrong? What if he was discovered? What if Heaton found out and shopped him to Rich? What if he ended up being on the receiving end of one of the SA-80s? Or one of Heaton's IEDs? Too many what-ifs. Sean found a cheap box of chocolates and went back out to the taxi. You need to understand, said the spook as they headed back towards the barracks, that this is highly secret and dangerous. If anyone suspects anything, I, indeed anyone else involved in this investigation, will be unable to help you. And if the ones we are trying to catch get even a whiff of something amiss, then I wouldn't count on them being forgiving. Makes me feel so much better, Sean muttered. So what exactly am I looking for, and how will I know when it's all over? The answer to both those questions is that we don't know. We desperately need grassroots intelligence, just to understand what we're up against. We want to stop Rich, to prosecute him. But we don't yet know how. We know what kind of person he is, but what makes him tick, what he wants, that's another matter. So feed us everything you learn, and we'll do the rest. The more we know, the better. The barracks were up ahead now. Although the hangover was gone, Sean was feeling sick again. Frying pan and fire sprang to mind. He needed to lie down, to sleep, to forget about all this. Wake up and find that it was all a dream. Except that wasn't going to happen, was it? You, Private, the man added, are our best lead in months, if not years. How much danger am I in? Sean asked as the Prius pulled into the curb. The driver turned round, stared hard at Sean, the engine on idle. You're a soldier, he said, voice flat, no emotion. You are trained for dangerous situations. It's not all about humanitarian aid and rescuing children from burning houses. So you will be in danger, yes, but that's what you signed up for, isn't it? You made your choices. Sean opened the door. You can't just leave, said the man. Why? Sean asked. The man pointed at the timer on the dashboard. I have to pay for this. The man stared, said nothing, and Sean realized that of course they were in view of the guards. Everything had to be normal, and that included returning squaddies paying off the taxi driver. He settled up. Keep the change, he muttered, and slammed the door.